Now, Seth Klein, we haven't talked for a while, and there is this referendum on HST, and I've talked to John Richards, SFU professor, and he's one of the authors of this recommendation for the HST.
In theory, I don't have a problem with the idea of having a value-added sales tax like the HST. But ever since the HST was introduced, we were pointing out that there were problems with how they structured the low-income credit. That if you were very poor, the low-income credit probably offset the additional cost of the HST. But that low-income credit cut in at an income, or cut out at an income too low, $20,000, and it phases out very quickly. And we had been saying all along they should rework the design of the credit, set the threshold higher, phase it out more gradually, and pay for that with an increase in corporate taxes, because there's no question the HST gives a big tax cut to corporations. But that's not the route that the government has gone. Instead, they've cut it by 2%, or at least they've promised that over time they would cut it by 2%, which is a much more expensive fix, if you will. It gives very large tax cuts to upper income people who didn't really need it.
Now, I've heard from your writings previously that consumption taxes are regressive, and that income tax can be progressive, and they are at the moment. So why would you recommend one way or the other, whether it shifts a little less from businesses to people, or vice versa, and instead of saying, why don't we do away with it altogether and try having a more progressive income tax rather than going the route of GST or PST or HST?
Right. Well, in fact, overall, what we've recommended is that we have a fair tax commission as a province, where we put the whole tax system, all taxes and resource royalties and business taxes on the table, and have some sort of a deliberative public engagement, you know, maybe like the Citizens Assembly on electoral reform, or the conversation on health, where we have a real fulsome discussion about how much money we need to raise and how we want to raise it. Because in that scenario, it may well be that what the outcome would be is that we would have both. We would have a more progressive income tax system and a consumption tax, and we would design offsetting measures for low and modest income households so that they wouldn't be hard hit by consumption taxes. You know, if you look at most Scandinavian countries, which all of us would say are much more equal, they actually rely quite heavily on value-added taxes like the HST that are set at quite a higher level than what we have here. They also have a more progressive income tax regime, and they achieve even more redistribution through what they choose to spend that money on, which public programs and a more a fuller social, more complete social safety net, so that the overall outcome is a more equal society. We've never had a chance to have a conversation like that. And instead, when we look at the overall tax system in British Columbia, and we looked at this in a report we published just a couple of weeks ago, what we find is that when you look at all taxes individuals pay, income taxes, which as you know are progressive, and sales taxes, and MSP premiums, and property taxes, and carbon tax, and you roll all that together, and you look at how much households are paying in all of those taxes as a share of their income, we actually have an overall regressive tax system in British Columbia. We have a downward sloping tax system where the richer you are, the less you're paying.
So your recommendation would be to have only progressive income taxes then, and do away with all kind of consumption taxes?
Well, my main recommendation is let's have the conversation. Let's have a fair tax commission. Let's engage British Columbians and see what they say. If I had my druthers, we would raise a lot more money overall Because if we're going to actually,
how would you raise more money?
well, this is the point. But if we're going to truly rise to the challenge of eliminating poverty, if we're truly going to rise to the challenge presented by climate change, we need to raise more government revenues than what we're doing currently. And I would like to see that happen through a combination of taxes. I would like to see a more progressive income tax system where we raise upper income taxes and maybe even have additional tax brackets at the high end. Right now we have 5 tax brackets in BC. Why not 6? Why not 7? And have a more progressive tax regime. But I also think there may be a place for a sales tax, like the HST, but in combination with other measures, maybe getting rid of MSP premiums, which are the most regressive of taxes, by far, and having a low-income credit. So, for example, take carbon taxes. Now, carbon taxes are a sales tax. They're regressive in and of themselves. Does that mean we shouldn't do it? No, I would say we should have a carbon tax, and we should, in fact, have a higher carbon tax.
To discourage polluters.
Yes, but you've got to get the design right. And this is what the CCPA has modeled, is reshifting how we've structured the low-income credit so that it offsets the higher cost of that tax for all low and modest income households and not just a few.
So you're saying that in some cases consumption tax is understandable because that would refrain people from overusing some resources or abusing the environment. But in most cases, consumption taxes being regressive is not the best way to go.
Overall, you wouldn't want as a society to be overly reliant on consumption taxes. That would be regressive. It's all about the broader mix.
Yeah.
In that study that we released just a couple weeks ago, an amazing shift has happened in where government revenues come from in the last 10 years. The BC Treasury now gets more income from sales taxes than it does from income taxes. It gets more money from MSP premiums than it gets from corporate income taxes. And that's clearly not how it should be. The point is that we want an overall tax regime where if you're very low income, you're contributing into the collective pool very modestly, and the more income you make, the more you're contributing. And it is the sad legacy of the different kinds of tax cuts that we've had in recent years that is not at all the system that we have. We have the reverse. The more you make, the less you pay as a share of your income, and I don't think that's what anybody really wants.
Now, one more thing said, they said that $1.6 billion is something that the province would have to pay if the GST or the HST is rejected. Why is that?
The federal government has long wanted the province to harmonize its sales tax with the GST. And so they offered a few years back a $1.6 billion enticement, a little carrot, that if we harmonized our tax, they would transfer to the province $1.6 billion, and they have done that.
Yeah, but why is that?
So
why did they have to give $1.6 billion to the province? What was the excuse?
Well, this is, it's an interesting point, and I actually wrote a little piece on this at the time a couple of years ago, which is to ask, as I think you are, why do the feds care so much? Why are they so convinced that a harmonized tax is so important that they would be willing to pay the province, as they did, $1.6 billion to harmonize? My feeling about that is the key beneficiary of harmonization are the export industries, particularly the resource export industries. And the federal government really has no economic strategy other than boosting exports and cutting taxes. And so them wanting to make their exporters more competitive is pretty core to their economic strategy, and that's why they offer this enticement.
But how does it link with the government of BC receiving $1.6 billion, of which I understand only $1 billion has already been transferred. How does it help the exporters?
The exporters are helped by the HST itself. And so the main argument that's made in favor of the HST is that it stems the fact that the rolling costs of the old PST. So if you were a manufacturer, every time that you paid for an input, you were paying PST, and that cost was built in at each stage. Under the HST, producers will get rebates for the sales tax that they paid on their inputs.
Okay.
And that is the reason why the HST is almost a $2 billion savings to corporations. It's in those rebates.
So are you saying, Seth, that the $1.6 billion that the federal government is given to the provincial is because the provincial has to give rebates to the exporting companies?
No. It was just a straight up enticement to the province to please do an HST.
A bribe, say, I'll give you $10 if you promise to pay me $3 every week for the next 100 weeks.
Well, it was more like, I promise to pay you this if you help our friends out in the business sector by doing an HST. All I would say is, well, nothing is without cost. If we went back to the PST, there would be a cost. But as I was saying at the outset, Christy Clark, with her so-called fix, and her proposal to now reduce the HST from 12% to 10% is even more expensive. So, initially, there's been this crazy shifting in their position where initially they said, oh, we have to stay with the HST because going back to the PST would be too expensive. Now their proposed fix actually blows a much bigger hole in the budget, not once, every year, in foregone money with that reduction of 2 percentage points.
Because they won't be collecting that extra 2%, so it's gonna bring a bigger deficit.
Right.
The idea that we should have progressive taxes is something that you would rather see in a referendum. Have you tried seeing that on now polling.ca, which is a referendum?
Listen, I'm going to tell you something that I've learned from this exercise. If we've learned anything, a referendum like this is no way to set tax policy, because we're having we're forcing people to cast a vote on a very narrow question.
Well, it's a convoluted question. It's a convoluted question. Yes means no, and no means yes.
Absolutely. There's that's a whole separate problem.
Yeah.
But even if the question was well written, we are forcing people to cast a vote on a very narrow question when what we really need is a more fulsome conversation about the overall tax system we want. For example, if I said to people, would you like an HST? Probably they're going to say no. But if I said to people, well, how about we have an HST, but in exchange we get rid of MSP premiums, which are even more regressive, the answer might change. The point is, I would much sooner see an exercise in public engagement where we get to hear each other and deliberate and engage in trade-offs and figure out what our objective is, rather than this. It's fueled anti-tax sentiment, and it's no way to make tax policy.
So, well, we'll see what happens.
Yeah.
So thank you for your words.
Okay, good to see you.
We'll see you again, Seth.
Bye-bye.